The first reading is the call of Moses. I assume it's a story that most of you have heard at some point. This really interesting moment where Moses out tending the flock, he sees this bush burning, but it's not being consumed by the fire. He's curious, he walks over, and then there he encounters God. And God tells him, Moses, you're my guy. You are going to go to Egypt, and you are going to lead the people, my people, out of slavery to the promised land. The call of Moses. It's not the only story like that I hope you know. Pardon me. Lots of call stories in the Bible. Some of them are pretty simple. Some of you may remember the call of Abraham. There's not much to it. It just says, God said to Abraham, and then what God spoke. Others, some of the prophets, the book will start off with just the word of the Lord came to Amos, and that's all there is to it. But others, wow, they're terrific stories. This one of Moses. Some of you will remember Isaiah, the call of Isaiah. We heard that story a couple weeks ago. Isaiah had this vision that he was up in heaven and in the throne room of God. And at one point, God says, who's going to go for us? Who shall we send? And Isaiah, here am I, send me. There's St. Paul on the road to Damascus. This amazing moment for him. He's heading off to persecute Christians, and God, this light comes on him, and he falls to the ground, and a voice, Jesus' voice, calls him not to persecute, but to preach. And then, St. Peter, the great catch of fish. You remember that story? Jesus puts out into the water, and all these fish are, they catch all these fish. And Peter encounters Jesus, if you will, encounters the Messiah in that point. At that moment, Jesus says to him, follow me. You're going to catch men after this. All these great stories that we get out of the Bible. And as we, through Lent here, are thinking about things to remember, I think these stories are worth remembering. And if you want to take it one step farther, you would also remember that you and I, all of us, are called by God. And that may be the first sticking point for a lot of people. They think, oh, no. These call stories, they only happen to, great people. I am not St. Paul. I am not Moses. I'm just little old me. But that's not true. If you recall, St. Paul tells us, you and I, we are the body of Christ. We all count. We all have a job in the body of Christ. Some of us medically have had moments where one part of our body, sometimes even a small part, doesn't work. And that affects the whole body. And so we are all called. There's no doubt about that. But as you consider, of course, then there's a number of objections you might bring up. One of those is, wait, I'm not good enough to be called by God. I don't have enough talents, whatever it is, whatever your objection. And I would just remind you that just about every one of these really good call stories in the Bible, God calls, and the very next thing that happens is somebody makes an excuse. Moses, we didn't read it. They cut it out of the reading today, unfortunately. But after God speaks to Moses and says, you're going to do this, Moses starts a litany of excuses. One you heard, well, if I show up and they ask who sent me, what do I say? But the best excuse Moses comes up with, he says to God, I can't do this because I don't talk well. And Jewish scholars have long thought that the reason Moses said that was because he stuttered, which is a fascinating thing to me. God sends a guy who stutters to talk to the most powerful person on the planet in that day. And so when you and I are sitting here going like, well, wait, I'm not up for this. I don't have enough, or I am flawed in some way. I can't possibly do anything for God. I think these stories will remind you that that's not the case. Some of you remember it's a cute little saying, God does not call the equipped, he equips the called. Once God figures out that you're the person he wants to do whatever it is, God will make sure that you have what you need to get it done. So you get past all these objections, and then it's a question of like, okay, well, God has called me. But then you might think, well, especially for some of us a little older, you might think, well, that's already happened. Or it only happens once in your life. And that also is not true. That's a common thing. Call is about, a young person figures out if they're going to be a priest or get married, and they figure that out and we're done. But that's not the case at all. It is, God calls all the time, I think, in big and little ways, and I think it's the little ways that are most important. We just need to be open to those calls. Which then brings the point, I don't know, how do you do this? Because most of you don't see bushes that are burning and have voices talk out of them. Most of you don't have miraculous things happen like great catches of fish. Most of us don't have great visions of God. How do you and I know that God is calling? How do we hear that call? It is certainly a longer topic, but let me just offer you one thing to get you started. I think a great trick to this, or a great opening foundational thing, is that you and I just need to be open to the call, open to the possibility. I mean, think about it. That's what Moses did. He sees a burning bush. That is not likely to have surprised him at all. Where he was, that, kind of like a little brush fire, okay, those things happen. But he notices that the bush isn't burning up, and he's curious, and he's open, and he walks over to see what's going on. In my own life, let me just give you a small example. I got a phone call from my brother. He said a parent had asked him if he knew of someone that would tutor her daughter in physical science, 8th grade physical science. And my brother called me up and said, are you interested in doing this? And I can tell you, at that moment, the answer was no. Physical science is a pretty watered down kind of subject, especially at 8th grade. It did not interest me. I had no need of a little extra money that you might get from tutoring. I didn't want to do this. But over the years, there was always this thing in my head that if I was saying no for, if you will, selfish reasons, but the calendar was actually open, in other words, I could do it, I just did not want to do it. I had a tendency to know that the good Lord's hand might be in this. And so I said, okay, all right, I'll give it a try. What that yes did in that moment, it led me to, really a number of years, maybe 8-10 years of a ministry of tutoring. You don't think that, just helping kids with their academic subjects is ministry, but it turned out to be that. If for no other reason than just, especially the kids that I was tutoring, they had their self-worth tied up in their academic grades. And so when they were doing well academically, they felt good about themselves. And when they weren't doing well, they didn't feel good about themselves. And so just being able to help them. And it turned out, something I didn't know, actually I had a little bit of talent in this. And as I could help them and I could get them back on track and leave them then to their own studies, go help somebody else, I just felt like I was just reminding them of their self-worth, reminding them that, yeah, you're good, you're fine, you're good, you'll be fine. That's just one small example of just being open. You could do the same thing, just the bulletin has always got opportunities in it, and the question is, as you read it, do you read it with kind of like, nope, 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 or do you read it with sort of an open, like, well, I don't know, maybe? I'm not suggesting you would want to say yes to all the opportunities. I'm just suggesting that you might want to approach it slower, maybe with an open spirit, maybe something in there. I do know a terrific story of a woman who volunteered for something small and insignificant at her church. Why she said she did it was kind of a bit of a story, but she just felt like, I need to do something at my church. That led her to any number of friendships. And it got to the point, she told me, that rather than walking into church as she did on a typical Sunday before this, and she could, greet 2, 3, 4, 5 people, she was now walking into the church and knew upwards of 100 people by name, knew something about them. And it all started because she just said yes to a small, trivial opportunity. Those are the ways I think the good Lord calls most of us. And so I would just encourage you to give that some thought. Do you want to answer God's call? It may be scary, there's no doubt about that. For heaven's sakes, when God called Isaiah, he basically said to Isaiah, look, I'm going to send you to the people to preach, but they're not going to believe you. It's not going to work. And that's got to be depressing to hear something like that. And so, yeah, there might be some rough moments in answering God's call. But in the end, you have to ask yourself, isn't it worth it? The few stories I could tell you about myself when I've answered God's call, I've never regretted it. I don't think there's any doubt Moses had some rough times. I don't think Moses got to the end of his life and regretted going to the burning bush. St. Paul, despite being persecuted, eventually martyred for the faith. I don't think he regretted all that he did. I don't think any of the prophets that you come across in the Bible, nobody that follows God's call regrets the decision. I think that would be true of us as well.